Hello everyone, I'm Nitzahone, and I provide limited content here on the Aether Hub. Today, I'm giving you guys a guide on drafting improvised decks in Aether Revolt. I've drafted the format about 30 times now, and Improvise has proven to me to be the most consistently powerful of all the archetypes. This is because many of the key cards in the deck are interchangeable and are also common and uncommon, so it is a deck that comes together without relying on super specific cards to pull together. So first, I'm going to do a quick overview of what Improvise does and what colors the mechanic appears on, and then we will discuss the cards you want to be prioritizing if you are drafting this deck. Improvise, as you can see here, is a mechanic in Aether Revolt that allows you to tap artifacts to help pay the mana cost of cards, which allows you to pay cards with higher mana costs much more quickly. So Improvise decks are interested in playing artifacts, especially lower curve artifacts, because the more you can get in play early, the more quickly you can play your threat with Improvise in your hand. Improvise only appears on cards of 3 colors in Aether Revolt, black, red, and blue, and it appears on 2 colorless cards. The best way to take advantage of Improvise, though, is to play some combination of these colors. Let's look at the common and uncommon cards with Improvise in each of these colors. For each color, I'm putting the cards in order of how happy I am to have the card in my Improvise deck. I'm including Barricade Breaker and Foundry Assembler with cards of each color since they can both be played by decks of any color. In blue, I'm pretty happy to have the top 4 cards on this list. Windkin Raiders isn't very difficult to play on turn 5, and sometimes you can even get them in play on turn 4, and I value their evasiveness more than any of these other cards because they can just quickly end games in the air. Reverse Engineer is just excellent because it reloads your hand, often for only 2 blue mana in the later part of the game. Barricade Breaker and Bastion Inventor are close, and they bring different things to the table. The Breaker presents a very large threat that has to be dealt with, one that can pretty easily come down on turn 5. The Inventor comes down on turn 4 or 5 usually, and provides a hexproof body of decent size, but I usually take the Breaker earlier, especially because it is an uncommon. I'm not likely to see another one, and I'm pretty likely to get another shot at Bastion Inventor. I don't think Metallic Rebuke, which isn't on this list, but you can see here, should be mainboarded in most situations. You'd rather have it slot filled with an artifact to reduce the cost of all these other cards. I don't like Rebuke or most counter magic in Limited because it frequently just does nothing. You can end up in situations where you leave 1 blue up and leave 2 artifacts untapped to counter your opponent's spell, and then they either just don't play anything or they play something that leaves 3 mana untapped, and that never feels good and means you take a pretty big tempo hit. It is a reasonable sideboard card against opponents with big bombs though. Overall, blue actually has the most cards with Improvise at common and uncommon, so it is usually the best color to be in for Improvise. Now, let's look at common and uncommon red Improvisers. Red is not nearly as deep at Improvise as blue is. I think Barricade Breaker is better than either of the common and uncommon Improvise creatures, though both Enraged Giant and Sweatworks Brawler are actually quite good, and are cards I'm very happy to have in any artifact-centric deck. Enraged Giant comes down on turn 5, and that's pretty scary, but he can also come down on turn 4 pretty easily, and a turn 3 Sweatworks Brawler, a 3 mana 3/3 with Menace essentially, is also not a fun thing to have to deal with. Now let's move to black. Black also only brings 1 common and 1 uncommon to the table, but I think the black common is better than either of the red common or uncommon Improvisers. He may not have any keyword abilities, but the fact that Fenhauler can't be blocked by artifact creatures often ends up being very relevant, and that can regularly mean you just can't be double blocked. He isn't very difficult to play on turn 5 either. Barricade Breaker is better than the uncommon black Improviser though, which is pretty underwhelming. Sly Requisitioner has Improvised, but doesn't provide much in terms of board presence, unlike most other cards with Improvise. She does allow you to get a servo token every time a non-token artifact dies, which isn't bad, but she actually seems to be better in decks that want to revolt than she is in this kind of deck. That said, she's perfectly playable, just not an early pick. So now that we looked at the commons and uncommons, and it has become clear that blue is the best in that regard, let's look at the rare and mythic cards with Improvise. As you can see, while black and red don't have as many commons and uncommons with Improvise, they come out ahead when looking at rares and mythics by quite a lot. There basically isn't even a playable rare or mythic blue rare that has Improvise, while the red and black rares with Improvise are all first pickable. Herald of Anguish is arguably the biggest bomb in the entire format as he provides a huge flying body, makes your opponent pitch a card at your instep every turn, and can throw artifacts at things to kill them. If you open him at the start of a draft, take him. Don't even think about it. If you get him a little bit later, think about trying to push Improvise as he is the best payoff there is. Battle at the Bridge is an incredible removal spell that often allows you to kill your opponent's best creature while also gaining you a bunch of life to completely disrupt a race. Free Jam Regent isn't quite as powerful as the Demon, but he's still pretty strong, easy to play for 5 mana. This 4/4 flyer can also pump his power for fairly minimal investment. War of Invention, meanwhile, should not be played in 99% of circumstances. It is just too difficult to set up, it has a triple blue cost which isn't that easy to pay, and it's definitely more of a card that is good and constructed. Alright, now that we've looked at all the cards with Improvise and Aether Revolt, let's look at the other key part for an Improvise deck. Cheap artifacts that allow you to play all of these spells much more quickly. Cheap artifacts are essential for your Improvised deck to work out. If you don't get enough of them, you will find your hand clogged with Improvised cards that you can't cast or you have to play for their their real mana cost, which isn't what you want to be doing. Once you have 3 or more cards with Improvise, especially if they are win conditions like Fenhaller or Windkin Raiders or one of the big rare bombs, you should be prioritizing artifacts like these that all cost 2 or less. I don't mean to imply that you shouldn't also be wanting artifacts with converted mana cost of 3 or more, because you do, but these low curve artifacts allow you to do the more busted things because they let you play things much more quickly. If you can just chain together a bunch of 1 and 2 mana artifacts, you can easily play 6 drops on turn 4. These are, once again, arranged in order of how much I want them in my Improvise deck, which also basically means in what order I would pick them. Pacification Array is just one of the best uncommons in this set and is already very powerful. Going great with Improvise just makes it even better. The 3 Ether creatures, while not technically artifacts, all produce a servo with relative ease, helping out your Improvise. Renegade Map is great because it allows you to splash a 3rd color, which is usually what you want to be doing here, is splashing the 3rd color that is one of the 3 colors with Improvise. So if your deck is mostly blue-red, splashing black for a Fenhaller or a gold card is pretty sweet. Servo Schematic provides you with 2 artifacts for Improvise for only 2 mana. The 2 automatons are cheap and also provide late game value thanks to their activated ability. Solvent sits around and does nothing for a while in most decks, but if you have enough cards with Improvise, it can sort of be a mana rock for several turns before it kills something in the late game. And finally, the 2 implements provide you with cheap artifacts that let you cycle through your deck and also have a small effect. The 2 main things you want for your Improvise deck are creatures, and especially creatures with Improvise who can provide you with a win condition, and low-costed artifacts to get them into play quickly. These cards are basically all interchangeable with one another, making it pretty easy to construct this deck. What makes it even easier is that there are plenty of artifact payoffs that don't deal with Improvise and Aether Revolt, meaning you get even more benefit from playing all of these cheap artifacts. In addition to the gold Maverick Thopterus, which you saw at the beginning of this video, the gold cards in the other 2 Grixis color combinations of course also provide strong artifact payoffs. Efficient Construction is a powerful build-around that asks you to play a bunch of artifacts, which you're happy to do already if you're looking to improvise. Trophy Mage is great, provided you have things it can find, and Resourceful Return is a card that I actively want anytime I am in this deck. It isn't that hard to abuse, as your opponent will sometimes double block and kill your Improvise threat, then you play Resourceful Return, get it back, and draw a card. That's crazy value. It's not even like Magical Christmas Land value because I've probably done it in this format like 15 times. Running more than 1 return, though, it's worth noting, is dangerous, as it is not a very good card in the early part of a game and will basically just be a dead card. So if you get 1 in your opening hand, you don't like it. If you get 2, it's even worse. But that basically covers all of the cards in Aether Revolt that you'll be wanting if Improvise is open in your draft pod. But before we conclude, let's talk about some cards in Kaladesh, your 3rd pack in the format, that works especially well with this strategy. You already have access to 2 artifacts that are already going to be really good in basically any deck that are great for your deck. First of all, Inventor's Goggles, which we have here as a low curve artifact, helps you with Improvise. Also, you're going to have a lot of Artificers. All 3 of the Ether creatures who make servo tokens are in fact Artificers, and that's great for Inventor's Goggles. Prophetic Prism makes it easier for you to splash your 3rd color, but what you really want to be getting in this 3rd pack, the card that you want to see the most in this 3rd pack, is Gearseeker Serpent, and luckily for you, he's common, and that's something else that strengthens this deck. Is the best card for your deck, basically, that's not a mythic bomb or rare bomb, is Gearseeker Serpent, and it's not uncommon to get at least a couple of them in your 3rd pack of Kaladesh. So that's something to keep in mind, and there's also a few other little artifact things. I also like Foundry Inspector a lot in this deck. Reduces the cost of all your artifacts. You're playing a ton, so why wouldn't you want to do that? So, to sum up, this archetype is easy to assemble because there are so many common and uncommon cards that are fairly interchangeable. There are lots of creatures around with Improvise at lower rarities like common and uncommon, and basically any low-cost artifact becomes good in a deck like this one, even those that aren't normally super playable. Generally speaking, unless the colors are being completely cut, I think this is just the best deck to draft in Aether Revolt. Well, that does it for this archetype guide. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you have any questions about this video or anything else about Aether Revolt Limited, post them below and I'll do my best to get back to you. If you want to make sure you catch all of the great content being produced at the Aether Hub, including my draft videos, top 10 lists, and limited guides like this one, don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you were hungry for even more limited content than I provide here, head over to my channel, Neat Sahone Magic, for even more content about it. Thanks for watching.